going to continue talking about functions, and now we're going to talk about what is called function notation. Notation is just a word for how do we write it? What does it look like? So it's how we notate our function. So an equation, which we've talked about before, an equation, something that has an equal sign. An equation where each input has exactly one output is called a function. So you talked in the last lesson about a function and how it passes that vertical line test. A function that is a graph that is some type of a continuous graph. So you saw some that maybe look like lines or whatever, where they're not just points. Those all have equations that go to them. And those equations are then also functions because the graph was a function. A function looks just like an equation, has that equal sign, except we have this function notation that looks like this. And this is said f of x. F of x. And it is in place of where you might have had a y. So this means that the variable y and the variable f of x are the same thing. Okay, so anytime you have an f of x, it is the y variable. So when you think about your coordinate plane and how your coordinate plane has an x and a y axis, y is the same as your f of x. Other letters can be used besides this f that's in front. Some common ones are a g or an h, sometimes a p. Those would be g of x and h of x. It also doesn't have to be x. It could be any variable inside here. A lot of times we'll maybe see like g of t or g of n. So it's the outside letter of the inside letter. In function notation, the variable in parentheses, so your x that is currently here, must match the variable on the other side of your function. So for example, here is an equation, y equals 2x plus 1. All right, have an equal sign. To write it in function notation, I replace the y with function notation. And I can use any letter I want to in front, but I have to use an x because there's an x on the other side. If, however, my equation was y equals 2t plus 1, I'm going to replace my y with my function notation. I can still use an f is fine, but I have to use a t because there's a t on the other side. You do not get that choice. You get the choice of the letter in front, but the letter on the inside, you do not. So when I have a function, this is our function, this whole thing here, f of x equals 2x plus 1. This is the function name. This is function f. If this was a g, it would be function g. This is your input. And you're going to see here in a moment, anything you put in here, you must also put in here because these are the same and you're going to keep them the same. 2x plus 1 is what to output. So once I give you something for x to input, you would then do 2 times that plus 1. So similarly, if now instead of f of x, I have f of box, then I'm going to have 2 box plus 1 instead of 2x plus 1 because these two things must match. F of star is going to be 2 star plus 1 because I replaced the x with a star. F of heart is 2 heart plus 1. Whatever you put inside this parenthesis, it must match where your variable is on the other side. So we are not going to plug in boxes and stars and hearts. We're going to plug in numbers. The number that we plug in for your input variable goes every place you see that variable on the function side. So we do this to find the y value of your function since f of x is y. That means I'm going to give you an x value. let's say I know that x equals 3. We can find the y value using our function by calculating f of 3. I'm going to replace x with 3 because x equals 3. This is just a random example. I came up with 3. You're going to have that. It's going to be given to you. You don't have to create it on your own. It's just an example. But because I have x equals 3, I'm going to replace the x with 3 inside my function notation. And so now if I replace this with a 3, I need to replace the x over here with a 3. So I'm going to do 2 times 3 plus 1. And then I'm just going to type this in my calculator into Desmos. 2 times 3 plus 1, which is 7. So f of 3, which is y, is 7. So when the x value is 3, so I could write that as a coordinate point. 3, 7, because x is 3 and y is 7. All right, you're going to do these first 4 examples here. I will do one with you, and then you're going to do the other 3. The directions here say write each equation in function notation. All that means is you take the variable that you have that's by itself, and you're going to get rid of it, and you're going to replace it with our function notation. Remember that you can use any letter you want to, but F, G, H, and P are your most common. I'm going to use G because I can. Now, what goes in the parenthesis matters. It has to be the letter that you have on the other side. So this is going to be G of X equals, well, the rest of it stays the same, 5x plus 3. This is now, instead of an equation, I now have a function. You're going to try 2, 3, and 4. When you pick the letter on the outside, it doesn't really matter, but it cannot be the same as the letter on the inside, and the letter on the inside has to come from your letter over here. So x of x, I could not have done that. I have to have an x on the inside, so I need to use any other letter on the outside. You're going to try these 3, and then you need to get them checked. Do them. Get them checked by Mrs. Mullen before you move on. If you followed your directions correctly, you should have had 1, 2, 3, and 4 all done and checked by Mrs. Mullen before you are moving on to 5, 6, 7, and 8. Otherwise, you need to stop and go back and do those. Okay. Let's talk about how to do 5, 6, 7, and 8. This time it says evaluate each function for the specified value. So this is where we're going to use the function that's given. In this first problem, here is your function. G of n equals n plus 2. And it tells you what I want to find. I want to find G of 1. So to find G of 1, since I replaced this n with a 1, I need to replace this n with a 1. And then I'm going to keep the rest of the function the same. 1 plus 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. There's your answer. G of 1 equals 3. If I wanted to write this as a coordinate point, 1 is your x value and 3 is your y value. We'll go through number 6. Here's your function, w of x equals 4x plus 5. I want to find w of negative 8. Well, I replace this x with a negative 8, so when I go to do my function, I'm going to keep everything the same except anywhere I see an x, I need to plug in a negative 8. This is 4x. So remember 4x is 4 times x, and x is negative 8 plus 5. And I'm going to just type that into a calculator. I'm going to type that into Desmos. When you do that, you should get negative 27. I don't need you to show the work on this. I don't need you to show how I got negative 27. I need to show exactly what I have written. I need you to show you plugging it in And then you can just type this in Desmos to get this answer. So W of -8 equals -27. Once again, if I were to write this as a coordinate point, this is my x and this is my y, it would be -8 and -27. All right, let's look at a couple more complicated ones. Here is your function, this whole thing here. H of t equals -3t squared plus 3t minus 3, this whole thing. I want to find h of -2. So I replace t with a -2. Everywhere I see a t, I need to replace it with -2. So right here and right here, I have two places where I have a t. That -3 in front is going to stay a -3. Now, if you recall from Unit 1, because I'm going to square this one, I need to put that -2 in parentheses with the squared on the outside. That was something you learned in Unit 1. Anytime you square a number, the number needs to go in parentheses with the squared on the outside. The -3 does not. It is only whatever you are plugging in for t that goes in parentheses. Now I'm going to continue this function. Plus 3 times t again, which is -2, minus 3. If you type that into Desmos, which you should pause and do that, because if you don't type it in correctly and get the right answer, you should call Mrs. Mullen over to know what you did wrong. So you're going to type this into Desmos. Pause the video. Go do that. If you still haven't paused the video to go to Desmos, pause the video. Type this in Desmos. Once you have, you should have gotten -21. So h of -2 equals -21. If you didn't get -21, you need to talk with Mrs. Mullen and find out what you typed into Desmos wrong. And the last one here. Here is our function. This whole thing. Everywhere I see an x, I'm going to replace with -4. The negative is going to stay outside. I am plugging in something that's going to get squared. So in parentheses, plug in the -4. Close the parentheses, squared. So there should be a negative on the outside from this negative. X is -4, goes in parentheses, squared. Plus 4 times, because 4x is 4 times -4, minus 11. Once again, pause the video. Go type this in Desmos to make sure you know how to type it in correctly. Take the time to do that, because if you get it wrong, you want to know what you typed into Desmos wrong, how to fix your mistake. Once you have typed it into Desmos, you should have gotten -43. So g of -4 equals -43. And at this point, you need to stop watching this video because it's about to be over. And you need to go do the first IXL on your agenda before you watch the second video.